Hi, I'm Andrew Berry and welcome to At the Bench's YouTube channel. It's always tricky when you want to add some embellishments onto a ring. Embellishments, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean add in perhaps little melted silver balls or particular certain shapes you've stamped out or bits of wire onto a silver ring. There is quite an easy and straightforward way of doing this, and the thing to do is to think ahead. If I was making up a silver ring and I wanted to add the embellishments, and you can add little bits of gold, little bits of scrap or odd jump rings that you've melted into balls, and you can solder them on top of a lovely silver band. Absolutely gorgeous effect. But I always like to think ahead. It's very difficult to grab a silver band and then to try and balance your embellishments on the top of the surface, because the surface is curved this way. Perhaps if you're using a D-section band, it's curved this way as well. So when you come to solder, it's going to be very hard to balance anything onto the surface. You can get around that in one way by perhaps using a pair of self-locking tweezers. On my third hand, for instance, and I would use the third hand just to clamp down whatever I wanted to be soldered onto the surface whilst I was soldering. But I always like to think ahead. Why make the ring up first, then solder on your embellishments and your little pieces? Why not just start with the ring blank, nice and straight? And in this case, I got a little bit of silver for this demonstration, and I'm going to solder on different shapes in certain places along that strip. Then you can bend the metal around into the ring shape, and as you do that, if you had some wire on the surface, then the wire, then because it's soldered onto the surface, will bend to the shape of the ring. Whereas if you try to get a piece of wire onto this ring that's already made, it's going to be very difficult to lay it on the surface to follow in the contours of the ring. So it's easier to start off with the strip, and that was a little ball that I just melted down for this demonstration. There it is. It's easier to get the strip, solder on the strip first, then bend the ring round. Now, a lot of you will have problems when you come to do this. Even in this particular way, is where you put the flux onto the surface, you put your embellishments just where you want them to go, you heat up the blank, and the borax in this case, or the flux, will start to bubble up, and the little pieces will just move all over the place, and perhaps they won't go back in the same places you originally put them. I'll show you ways that we're going to overcome that now. The one thing that you need to be able to do quite confidently is to solder, and we're going to be doing some sweat soldering today. Sweat soldering, what do we mean by that? It simply means putting the solder, melting the solder onto one part of the metal first, then putting the other part of the metal in contact with the solder, and then heating that up. And what happens, because then the heat from the larger part of the metal will cause the solder to melt on the smaller part of the metal, and the two will become fused. And that's one great way that we can be sure that we don't get excess solder anywhere, and also we can ensure that those little embellishments will stay in the right place. Okay, so let's just have a look and see what we've got here first of all. We've got a strip of silver, and we've got a little ball, half moon, triangular piece, and a rectangular piece of silver. So we need to make sure that all the surfaces are clean before we go any further, before we try and solder, because I always like to be sure that everything is clean and the joints are going to be perfect before we even start it. What I would advise you to do is to get your little embellishments, little pieces, and make sure that the one surface that you've got here is nice and flat. And I'm just rubbing this on a buff stick to make sure they're flat. Turn that over, gorgeous. My moon shape. I've got that rectangular piece. And this ensures that all the grease and all the muck and all the oxides are off the surface, and I've got a silver ball here the flat on it, and that's looking good as well. Okay, so those are my 4 pieces that we're going to solder onto the strip. We're going to get some borax. I like to use borax, as you know. I get quite excited about borax. And we're going to paint some borax onto those surfaces that we have just sanded. And what we're going to do is flood solder onto these little pieces. I'm going to be using some hard solder. And you don't need a lot of solder, you just need enough solder just to cover these surfaces. So I've rolled down my piece of solder here, and you can hammer it so it's nice and thin, so you can get, it looks like quite a large piece of solder, but it is very, very thin. So I cut 4 pieces of solder there. I'm also going to make sure that I put a bit of borax onto it as well, so I can be sure that the solder will flow nicely. There we go. Okay, and let's heat up these small little pieces here and melt that solder onto the surfaces. I'm just using a very simple, small little butane torch here. Grab my tweezers, and let's just gently warm these up. The borax is going to bubble up, the solder is going to move around, but just gently warm this. Okay, let's start on the little ball that we've got here. The solder is going to melt onto the face just like that. The triangle here, solder is going to melt. If it doesn't go quite to the edge, just give a bit of a helping hand. The half moon shape. Like that, and our rectangular section. Beautiful. So you can see we've got solder flowed across the whole area that we have cleaned. That is the most important part. Now, grab the piece of silver, the silver ring blank that you're going to use, and clean that as well, because this really has to be a lovely, lovely and clean. If you want a polished finish, well then I would polish this first, put it through the ultrasonic, and then warm it up and quench it in the acid. So you'd still have that lovely polished finish on the top. So this is just purely for demonstration. Nice emerald, nice clean surface. Back onto the block, and we're going to get our borax. And again, what you can do is paint that onto the surface. And I would do the whole surface because it really does protect the surface from any oxides. Get your torch, warm this up. And what you want to make sure is that the areas now where you want your embellishments to fasten onto, there's a nice layer of borax. So we're going to heat the borax up. So what we're doing, we're minimizing the effect of the borax displacing these embellishments. So warm this up until the water has evaporated, until the borax has settled down. Okay, so what we're looking for is for the borax to change colour. We know the borax is not going to do an awful lot more. Okay, this is hot. Be careful. Do not touch it with your fingers. So now you can come along with your little pieces that you want to be soldered in place. Half moon. Let's put that way. Being careful now not to touch your face. Now this ball has got a little bit too much solder on that, so what I can do is just grab a small little file and just remove a little bit of the excess solder onto that, off that, if you can hold on to it, that is. Put a little bit of borax onto the end of that ball as well. And again, put that ball where you want it to be soldered. There we go. So those are the places where I want my pieces to be soldered. Now, when I heat this up, I know it is not going to bubble up, and I know they are going to be exactly where I want them to be. They are not going to move, they will stay exactly where they need to stay. Now, what you want to do is don't heat up the individual pieces because this large area is going to take some heat. So just warm up this strip with your flame first of all. Then the heat will be transferred through to those little embellishments, those little pieces of silver. And then when the temperature is right, the solder will flow exactly where it has to and nowhere else. So look at the colour of the flux. You can see that the pieces have not moved at all. They have stayed exactly where I have placed them. The colour of the flux is changing, so it's a dirtyish brown colour. Any second now the solder is going to melt on my small little pieces. Don't put the flame too much on those pieces. Rely on the big parts of the metal to get up to temperature. It's important for that to get the right temperature before your little pieces get to temperature as well. Here we go, any second now. The half moon shape. Gorgeous, solder's just starting to flow. Super. Come on to the little rectangular piece. There we go. Triangular piece. Gorgeous. The ball. Drop that down into place. There we go. Let's just turn that around and make sure the solder has come through, because don't forget the solder likes to come towards the heat, and it has. Perfect. Let's pop that in the acid. So it needs a little bit longer in the acid, but you can get the idea. The solder has flowed just around the outsides of our pieces. Hasn't flowed anywhere else. I got some borax that needs to come off in the pickle, but you can see how those pieces of silver did not move anywhere. They stayed exactly where they wanted to be. And now you are free to turn this around using your half round pliers. And because those embellishments are nicely attached onto the surface, they will bend. They may not bend initially because it's going to be a little bit thicker, but now you can bend the metal around and around. Put it up onto your mandrel, give that a bit of a tap. And we can turn that round. And I'm going to carry on finishing this off now into this very small ring. And that is how you can solder on small little embellishments onto a piece of silver without the borax moving, without the flux shifting those little pieces, and you can get really, really accurate solder placements. My name's Andrew Berry for At The Bench's YouTube channel. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. And don't forget, please subscribe. I'd love you to subscribe. Comment down below if you have any experiences or any films that you would like me to do for At The Bench's YouTube channel. And don't forget, please share this with your friends if you think this film would be of any interest to them as well. So don't forget, click subscribe, click the little bell, the little notifications, so when we do put films live on YouTube, you'll be notified straight away. My name is Andrew Berry. Thank you so much. Take care. I push the flame nearer. You will see, okay, so that's the best place. Go closer and you can see a black hole coming in the middle. Obviously, around that black hole is very, very hot. But you bring the flame too close and you're trying to solder something, and what you're trying to solder is inside that black hole. That is where there is no flame. That is inside the cone.